Well, good morning, Colleen Furlanetto, Mum. How you going? So we've had a recent event, very substantial fire. It started not far from where we are today. We're in Euroa. It started just on the Hume Highway in Longwood, and the fire has burnt, it's come, it's gone, but the effects of it are something very different. And I think at this point we're just over 5 months on from the fire. That's really where our focus needs to be. So you've been pretty busy as part of, what really is a huge team of volunteers and donors of service right across the fireground. Your focus has been in Ruffy. What springs to mind first? Like, what's the most challenging thing? What have you learnt from this process?
Well, I think you're right. This is the largest fire in state history on private land. So we've got people privately, whether it be farmers or people living on small hobby farms or other, impacted like never before. So the rule book is kind of out the window. However, it's really striking to me that this isn't the first fire that we've had. However, it feels very much that we're reinventing the wheel from day one, and that was from the response right through to now where we are in the midst of recovery. And I think people said to me that they felt equal after the fire had passed in those that lost their homes, because they were kind of comforted in a way that other people lost their homes. And what really struck me and strikes me now is they now don't feel connected or the same, because we have some people are on their recovery journey through a bunch of reasons, whether it was insurance or no insurance, that are a lot further on their recovery journey for a new home, or for what we're being promised is modular housing or temporary accommodation on the property. And then you have some others who are still looking at this same effect the day that the fire passed. So there's been no movement at all. And at Ruffy at the hall, which we were very fortunate, was not destroyed in the fire by some miraculous and hard work, and the CFA shed, that's been the centre, not only for Ruffy. I think it's really important that over 170 people are technically Ruffians. However, we believe that we're well over 1,000 sort of people catchment that kind of utilise our place in space. So it's the tablelands, is a really important thing, and that's up, down, across, and on. So I think what strikes me is the community can often do what government can't, but the community should never have to do what the government should. And we're in that situation at the moment, living it to this day.
So when you say the community has to do what government can't, is that because there's like a really specific response that's needed sometimes and it'd be hard for government to know? Is that what you're referring to? And then when we talk about what the government should, what do you mean by that? Like, this fire originated on the Hume Highway. There's a bunch of organisations which are a part of that firefighting effort. At what point does it become government responsibility, do you think?
So I think if I start with government responsibility and community responsibility, but it's in preparedness. We know natural disasters will happen. However, if you have a perfect storm day coming with an environment of where this fire started, that is not the first time a fire has started in similar circumstances, that we know that the freeway is really not set up as it should be as a big fire break. And the fire got away because could not get to the fire in a timely way. The wire rope barriers from CFA volunteers and other has been right from their commissioning to their design to everything is said, this is not going to work. We won't be able to get behind, you won't be able to keep the fuel load down, all of these things. it's come to fruition. So it's a case of we knew this would happen at some point, and so one spark has taken out the many hundreds of thousands of acres. What is also concerning, what government should not, or agencies of government should not be having to consider, this is going to cost $10,000 to put a bomb of retardant on this fire. Got to really justify that. So it's a big decision. It should be put the fire out at all cost. It shouldn't be, I'm going to have to ring up and ask someone if I can spend this money. Sure, there's things in place, absolutely, around sensible and informed decisions. However, what we saw and what we heard in my brigade's after action review was that cost was a factor in response. And when I say also what government should, is CFA is the largest volunteer organisation in the state, one of the largest, if not the, and the community closest to their community and the fire know what they need. Even with communications not working, of which that was also said, get a big fire event, digital radios are going to be a bit tricky, etc. So I think the use of every technology and every bit of knowledge was used on that day by volunteers. However, the volunteers were not heard. If they were heard, they weren't listened to. If they were listened to, they weren't believed. I was in a very privileged position to be at the ICC on the day that Ruffy went.
Really?
And you and Dad, you and John were up there. And I was in the ICC being tasked with jobs, largely on sticky notes, in an incident control centre, which was a bit concerning. And then it was a matter of Dad, my husband John, Dad, rang me and said, Ruffy has succumbed to the fire. That's not a word that you hear often, and certainly not one I've ever heard my husband speak. So I went and immediately told the municipal liaison officer and said, look, Ruffy's gone. No, sorry, you're wrong, it's not going to impact there for an hour. And I said, well, there are people there right now who have witnessed it, who are now trying to move forward with graders and anything they can to sort of in asset protection as it moves. No, it won't be there for an hour. Then all of a sudden they heard that it had gone, so there was a bit of flurry of activity. But what I didn't see, and I know you need coordinated, hasten slowly and not panic, but I didn't see a level of urgency in the ICC. I knew that people were trying to contact them to say, what's going on, this is what we need it now. And they were not heard. They were not listened to. The information would come in, it would be written down, that page would turn over. There was no urgency in acting now. So the ICC was making decisions on old information, on hours old information. So therefore, that was set in train for even a layperson like myself could see, well, you're behind the eight ball. You're not fighting the fire. You are not supporting those on the ground to have what they need. So I think when we move then to the immediacy after the fire, there are things that people need straight away: shelter, food, water, and connection. And it was the community who fought and just worked immensely like an army. I'll talk about the army later, but the community army got whatever they had, whether it was their hands with gloves or no gloves, or a bobcat or an excavator or a front end loader that wasn't fried, and a trailer and a chainsaw, found everything they could, and they started clearing the road for access. Chose one road that would be the easiest possible, most direct route, and worked on it together. It was getting worked on from one end, the long end, and the top end.
So you're talking about basic access to the tableland, which is thousands of acres of country up on a plateau, elevated plateau in the Ruffy Terra stretching across the Caveat Highlands sort of area. And that was volunteers and people just affected by the fire who had the job to clear that road.
Absolutely. And that was true for at least really until things started to move from a government perspective. It was pushing 3 weeks, really.
3 weeks.
Before there was crews on the ground able to be, because there's a bit of a conundrum with this fire, as it was so large and it was called one fire, as it was. Where it had passed for us at the top end of the fire, we were at day 3, 4, 5, 6, a week down the track, where lower down into the, the Merton or Molesworth, Yea, sort of Alex area, they're kind of not a week behind, but their impact was post ours, days post ours, often completely until the fire was out. But it was called one whole fire, so therefore it was all locked down. So hardly any government agency could get in. I think most distressingly, community had to deal with something that government should, was the euthanasia of animals. So we saw a local business in Shepparton provide the ammunition free to euthanize the stock, because they've come from a farming life and know that is every farmer's priority, to not have animals suffer. And so this ammunition got up the hill, because you could get up the hill if you thought about how you got there, and we were able to. And I think community mobilised, set a list of priorities, the people part, the animal part, the community part, and just tried to, hour by hour, minute by minute at some point, hour by hour, then day by day, and then the fodder was part of that. However, the euthanizing of the stock took really weeks. So you've got animals that were displaced, so they were finding animals, some miraculously okay, others in very, very appalling situation that no one wants to see. So what we saw mobilising was community having to go out and euthanize their stock, standing beside 80-year-old farmers, destroying their livelihood. And I think the challenge there was, while these young fellows, particularly that mobilised, now have this trauma screensaver for the rest of their life of what they had to do. No one had their arm up their back to do it, but they were exhausted. They were going out day after day after day and doing what needed to be done first, priorities, and working with these farmers and community. Now, this fire didn't just take farm animals, it took pets, it took, miraculously there's stories of chooks in chook pens that were near a house that for some reason that chook pen didn't burn, and the chooks didn't go off the lay, they kept laying, even in a disaster. So nature can do amazing things. One thing that animals aren't, and what people aren't, is we're not robots. We need sustenance, we need care, we need support, and we need to know that government is there for us. And I think it's fair to say that there is an element of the community that still feels abandoned by government, all levels of government, today, when we're nearly 6 months on. And if I think around that, for our work at the Tablelands Fire Recovery Hub, with a group of 6 people that came together, knew each other but not intimately, said, you go in that lane, you go that lane, and we all chose a place and space, not by a structured meeting on a whiteboard. It just happened because we were very fortunate that we brought skills from our daily life that we could see an immediacy need and coordinate as best we could, of whatever you want to call it, because it really wasn't coordinating. It was at some points it was begging and saying, what the heck's going on, we need support. But community mobilised with food, fodder and connection, and we've got this. If you met someone at 7 o'clock in the morning, by 11 o'clock that morning they were a rock. They were a part of your network. They were a solid foundation on which you, by the end of the day, hug them as part of the family because of such an event like this. Now, this happens in lots of events in crises. People come together and form this solid foundation. What happens though in a crisis, a solid foundation is only as good as the structure that it was built, and it's only as good as what wraps around a structure. And at the moment we don't have, because we had to rush to make our foundation, because we had to do it on nothing, because we had to rely totally on donations and goodwill, that came from everywhere, interstate, immediately, neighbour to neighbour. But what we don't have is a government wrapped around us now to make sure that structure doesn't crumble, that communities don't crumble, that people don't crumble. I've had the trust, in some ways the fortune, or the not good fortune, to have people contact me at their darkest hour because they're not supported and wrapped around. We don't have supports today, funding today, to our local government, to Strathbogie Shire in this instance, to do what they need to do. They do not have the funding and therefore the agility to provide staff and resources and rebuild, recover processes and supports, practical supports on the ground, because they have not got the funding. On the other hand, we have the state saying, there's funding. They are announcing this funding. There's a mismatch between where the funding is and where it isn't. And really, I don't really give two hoots about that, other than the fact that we, the community, are the ones stuck in the middle. We're the ones in the community continuing to have to do more with less, to be here 6 months in, pretty much every day of the week, for most of us, is working on the next thing, gathering community, ensuring there's food, ensuring there's clothing, ensuring there's now warm clothing. The contrast in Australia from 40-degree days to now minus 5 degrees is paramount, needs the same response but different equipment, and we're now asking for heaters, not coolers.
Right.
So I think the wraparound of government funding is so discombobulated because of the way that this fire has not run how every other disaster has, even the floods. Because of the EMV, ERV, shift and change, there's now the departments take on different roles. It's not one overarching body that coordinates this. It is a disconnected people in towers that might not even be in the same room.
Yep.
And importantly, Max, have not been on the ground, have not witnessed firsthand what this looks like, have not witnessed firsthand what people are doing with hardly any resources, not witnessed the mental health fatigue and the continuum that we see of mental health decline. This doesn't just impact people who may have had mental illness and mental health challenges before the fire, but as I said, none of us are robots. And what we are witnessing day in, day out, fatigue of our mental health and our well-being, needs to be wrapped around and supported so we don't become unwell, and heaven forbid, don't make a decision that changes everybody's life if we are not necessarily here at all. We lost one life, tragically, in this fire, but we will lose more to this fire, and I personally believe we have lost people to this fire that are not being counted or seen as a consequence of the fire.
Yeah, right.
Why does that matter, Max? It matters because we need to appreciate that previous fire events have had the resources on the ground for community immediately. Even if it needed to be a couple of weeks in, immediately there were often paid staff beside volunteers able to take on a heavy load of the administrative burden, because you have to document things. You get given things you have to document. You need a process around safe food handling because we can't have people getting sick. You need guidance around the medical and first aid that we had coming through. You have retired nurses, retired lawyers, retired chefs, or not retired chefs, or not retired nurses coming in and doing that in the early days. However, people need to get back to work and earn an income. That brings us to government policy and processes, that our income on farm for many is not the only income to keep farming afloat. So people need to have a second income outside, so they're teachers or nurses or tradies or whatever. So then to qualify for supports, financial supports, particularly for the primary producer, you need to have 50%, more than 50% on-farm income. Now, if you've been through a recent drought or you've been through a recent challenges around your farming, your income can vary year to year greatly, as we know. You can have good wool years, you can have a crop that's looking great, and then there's no crop. So we've got people that have off-farm income that are primary producers, absolutely primary producers, that don't qualify. And sadly, Max, we have people who this week, 5.5 months in, came into the Tablelands Hub, have not applied for any support. Nothing.
So, if we're not aiming for perfect, but just to get things clear, what organisation in the past might have taken that leadership role? I mean, there's always going to be things that do slip through the cracks as we get into minutiae, but just the broad, like you say, people, government staff from different organisations being alongside the volunteer effort to provide those basic procedures as an option, and then work through if they need to be made a little bit more detailed for a particular case. But what organisation would normally take that lead role?
Well, normally it's a combination of multiple organisations. So similar to what we saw when the secondary assessments came through. So for people who may not know, there's a first assessment of property loss that's done by CFA and FRV, that they go around and go house loss, shearing shed, etc., etc. Then there's a secondary assessment team came with its own challenges, because they weren't allowed to work if it was over 36 degrees or 34 degrees. So you had, in the heat of our summer, at a time when we needed people on the ground, weren't able to work because of policy and processes. It's fair to say that there were people though that said we've got to keep moving along here, and they probably did things, they tried to keep things ticking. But in that secondary assessment team, it was a multi-team approach. So you had arborists, secondary assessors qualified in disaster assessment, Red Cross representative or Victorian Council of Churches for pastoral care, for assisting people when they went onto property, through people walking all over there and touching and looking at things and writing notes down. It's can be very intimidating and trusting who these people were. They were meant to be there, because it's fair to say, Max, that there are lots of people that put on high-vis vests and a lanyard and are coming onto properties that possibly shouldn't. That's for another day. So this multi-pronged attack, so it had people from, in some cases, the GAG, the Department of Families, Fairness and Housing. So it was a and council representative. So council technically is, I believe, my understanding is, was the lead agency for the secondary assessment, supported by all of these structured supports that know what they're doing, that come together, do the secondary assessment, which is integral to have a true assessment for government to understand the real cost of the fire. However, there's challenges around that, because the time it takes to make an assessment meant that it was difficult. The trust and the concern and the poor communication caused more stress than it gave. Then also the level of skill by some of these people in these secondary assessments was really inappropriate in some cases. So this team would build, hang on a second, we need to get the right person in here. They would build, start to get momentum. No, this is not working, we need to get more skills in here. But they did their very best and got through as quickly as they could, but that took weeks. And this was a massive fire. There are only so many teams that can be built. But in these teams, I know for a fact there were people who are who were trained, skilled, who should have charged for it but said, we know that cost is an issue here, we are donating our time. There is something fundamentally wrong if we do not have a disaster plan that has the toolkit that you open, the big red book, push this button, this is what happens when it hits the fan. This is what is available for councils immediately. They start a tab. They're not going out buying pool tables or flat screen TVs. They start a tab of what the community needs to feed them, to clothe them, to house them, to clear the roads, to connect community, to do their job. Get out of local government's way to do their job, but getting out of their way, you need to provide them what they need. That doesn't mean, in all honesty, that all local governments have the right skills and team and awareness in their own team. So we need to be respectful of that. At the same time, local government, in this case, Strathbogie Shire, need to also appreciate those that are on the ground. What we're asking is not for a flat screen TV or a pool table either.
Because I've heard it said, it's been said to me, look Max, you've got to understand that local governments, like in our case in Strathbogie Shire, have to operate off a small rate base. They don't have a lot of money. You've got to understand, Max, they don't have the resources. They're ultimately going to be the arm of government that once the event is come and gone, takes responsibility for the roads, for the roadsides, for the community centres. It's critical they're a part of the process, and really we want the staff to be comfortable enough that once a big workload is passed through, they stay on, so that years down the track the understanding's there, the continuity's there, we're ready for the next event. It is bizarre to hear that the Shire doesn't feel that there's enough support coming through. That seems like the cheapest, most basic way to get resource through, to link from what volunteers and donors started in the recovery space, and then with the support of these more specific organisations with their history and skills and so on. So that whole system seems to have broken down to quite some degree, hasn't it?
It has, and I think for me most concerningly is most recently last week spoke with some leaders from government who came and spoke to, there was 3 of us from the Tablelands Hub that were available that day, with council, mayor and CEO and the tenants also. And it was a case of such, by one of the people present, such immaturity, such almost an insulting, I don't know how to phrase it without being sounding rude to the person, but I found the person was ill-informed and ignorant of the reality. And they are in a critically important role. And what I heard was we were explaining some issues and some challenges, and also opportunities and solutions, because that's something we're a bit good at. We like to point out what's the issue, give us this and that'll help it. Might not fix it, but it'll help us. This person wanted to defend more than assist. Okay. That's not helpful. There's a time for, and we were being very respectful. We could have really been, and I'm not known for, holding back, but we were extremely reserved, but yet very clear in what we had to say. Getting water to people 5.5 months down the track, you would think shouldn't be a hard thing to get them drinking water. Yeah. It's an issue because Deepa is now, there's some movement there. We've got tank initiatives going out, donated tanks, 2 Rotary initiatives that have put all these tanks out there. This latest round, which is only going in now as we speak, to fill them with water, because we're 5.5 months down the track now. Why do they need water? Because they don't have a roof to collect the water, to have the tank for them to qualify for then modular housing or caravan to go onto their property.
Yeah.
We've got this chicken and egg thing.
That's totally bizarre, isn't it? Like, just the basic practical knowledge, and that's why you've got to have people who are living it, integrated, and that certainly doesn't seem to be the case. And I guess that from the start of the process, people weren't in government departments and branches weren't involved. All this would seem quite overwhelming because now they've got to catch up, and the community's probably a fair way along the journey, and maybe a lot of that trust is broken down too.
I think catch up is the key phrase here. Firstly, they didn't need to be in a catch up mode if they'd heard what we were saying. They don't need to be in a catch up mode for the next disaster. However, I personally have very little confidence that we will do it any better next time as a government. But as a community, we cannot, as I said in my opening, the community can often do what the government can't, but that doesn't mean the community should do what the government should. And the government should be listening to community, should be listening to local governments, should be listening to our mayor and our CEO. And everything that they're saying, our recovery manager here is doing extraordinary work with hardly any resource.
Yeah.
Less resource than what we have as a volunteer base. Less resource from a government position, knowing what the community need, and every day having to make a decision that can't happen because there's not the money to do it, or there's not the resource for me to send someone up there. We now can't have a Shire representative to our Tuesday service days where the services come in, largely the case management, so Primary Care Connect and Family Care were awarded, or they do the case management on behalf of Windermere, which is the response agency around welfare from the government. The government basically funds Windermere to connect people. That's the 1-800 number that you ring, and the recovery line goes to Windermere, and then they hand it out to these case management.
So that you're referring to the social need.
The social need, but
yeah.
also the structural need, because
Okay.
then this connects to recovery, temporary housing,
Right.
and all things connected. So we've got people now that have accommodation till 30th of June that don't, because the funding runs out for their rent assistance for many on
So
the 30th
in
of June.
10 days' time,
Yep.
they're wondering
Yep.
where will they be?
And then things that happen without thought. An example of someone who went to get rent but needed to show that they were from a fire affected area and need their recent rate notice. And on their rate notice, because it was deferred, the payment of the rates were deferred a month. Unfortunately, when the rates come out, it says that they're in arrears on the rate notice. So they put their rate notice up as their evidence that they're on the fire ground, tick. However, where they were renting was, but you're in arrears with your rates. They weren't in arrears, they
So-
were with, yeah.
Is there no, for each fire affected land owner or resident, is there anybody that has the authority as a case manager or just communicator of the situation that can do some of this legwork for the affected? Because that would make a fair bit of sense to have someone they can trust as a point of reference. We know where they've been.
Absolutely. So there are for those that have case managers, but also case managers are people too, and their capacity and their experience varies. So there are some with disaster experience, but there are most have not. So this is their first rodeo with being a case manager in a disaster. They are trying their absolute best with what they also have, because they have to justify person X lost their house, needs accommodation, what are the priorities, shelter immediately, etc., etc. Now, we can only give out so many vouchers to fix things. Vouchers don't fix our sense of connection to where we live. Vouchers don't fix our mental health impacts. Maybe fewer vouchers help us get to supports. However, we need the supports to come to community, not community to the supports. And that means to the Aroa Hub, more support funded so it can be open longer. So we have full-time recovery officers, not part-time recovery officers, because there's not enough funding. For the case managers to have what they need, because most of the case managers are sprinkled around, coming from Seymour, Euroa, Shepparton, Benalla, Alexandra, all working in their family care or primary care connect space. They are every day taking stuff from our donated goods at the Tablelands to community. Not always community, mind you, that's immediate to the Tablelands, but if it's excess and it's community that's impacted by fire, we've allowed that to go to with them because, well, the fire knew no boundaries, neither should our recovery. So we're having donated goods that we're coordinating, stacking shelves, stacking, clothing and bedding and hanging things up and trying to make it look appeasable, half respectful for people who need to come in. But we're very proud people. We have, and stubborn. And I think what we're seeing are people now that haven't taken any supports are now doing so because they have to. I had someone say to me at one point that the hub enables people to be reliant on supports. I found that as a personally extraordinary statement, a negative statement. That's how it impacted me. But I think that comes from a place of that person not understanding that there's been a fire event coinciding with a cost of living crisis, coinciding with pressures of the fuel impact. Some farmers did not put in their crops because at the time when the fuel crisis was happening, they said, well, I can't make this gamble on a crop that I don't know. They're saying we're not going to get, it's going to be a dry year. I can't put all this money into fuel to put this crop to, do what I don't know. I'm better to buy a lotto ticket. So we just need the practicalities of government to understand all of the connecting actions, resources, processes to function anyway without a disaster need to align. Pop a disaster over the top of it. All of that can break down because people might not have filled in the form correctly. Let's give people who've been through the biggest trauma in their life. We know our brains in trauma, our cognitive load goes to our most primitive brain functions. Food, water, somewhere to be. However, we're not too good at that sometimes in our primitive nature because sometimes we give to others before we give to ourselves. It's a bit like put our own oxygen mask on before we help others, or else you can't help anyone. But you have people in this, we have people who are very high flyers, CEOs of companies, nurses, doctors, lawyers, who can make their way, that's their livelihood is around complexity and paperwork and processes, who are just going, if I can't manage this recovery process, how can someone of lower literacy or not access to that the disaster knowledge? And they are coming and using mental health supports, food, connection, because one thing's certain, Max, we're all people before we're a role, or before we're a job, or before we're a farmer or anything. We are people. And we are as individual as our fingerprint. We are not clones of each other. We are not the same in any way. Farmers farm differently, farmers farm similarly. Hobby farmers do things differently, they do things similarly. But we all need connection. We all need to feel that someone's got our back. Yeah. And at the moment, it is the community that's got the community's back.
Yeah.
And that's not sustainable to rely on 99.9% of donations for this hub at the Tablelands and the others. So Highlands, Yark, Fawcett, Gurrum, Crichtons Creek, Upton Hill only have their fire station, but they've got a little hub as best they can. They connecting. I think we all connect and work together because we have to. And I was talking before about, there are manuals that are sitting on shelves of how to do this. In previous fires, I had the good fortune of being actually an elected representative at that time on this shire, and we compiled, with consultation with group officers and fire captains, when it hits the fan, there is a direct line, if machinery is required, that is a trigger that goes straight to the CEO, and the CEO release that machinery. That was written, like page 1 or 2. Now that booklet, for whatever reason, wasn't pulled off the shelf every year and updated addresses and who were the connections, and I don't believe that they were able to locate it. So that's not okay. So we're only talking, that was around 2014, 15. Yes, it's a while ago, but that was a critical book that was built by community with government, with local government. That was a great tool. So what we're seeing now is, certainly hub-wise, that we're writing our own manual, and it will sit on every community shelf. So when it hits the fan, community or has some form of guide, very simple, templates. These are the numbers that need to be updating. What are the contacts? Who's the fire captain? Who's the local health service that can reach out? Who's etc. Who's in council as the contact? You touched on a very good point before around knowledge being lost in some of these support agencies. So in council, for example, it's a very transient, often for particularly the directors at director level in local governments, and that is a challenge around being able to fund and pay them to keep them. And I'm not going to say anything disparaging, but you pay peanuts, you get monkeys, right? You can't. People can't stay. They've got to feed their family, and if there's a job over the hill or in another shire or somewhere else where they can support their family but still doing what they love, they're going to make a call, right? So we lose that knowledge base. But what we don't lose is the core element, particularly in Strathbogie Shire. We've got people who've worked in the shire for 40 years.
Well, that's the thing. We know, like, many of the absolute rocks of the community that interact with the sporting part of the community and different, just super practical, incredibly capable people. They train people up, give a lot of people their start into first sort of roles of employment. Their capacity is massive. And that is somewhat separate to the executive layer in a shire, isn't it?
It is, and I think it is very difficult, having been on council as well, seeing that the staff, when things don't go well, we like to hammer council, and as a whole, we possibly don't realise that we're throwing mud at those that are absolutely blood, sweat and tears, and no fingernails left from clawing on, doing their absolute best. But leadership is accountable, no matter who the leader is. And I, as a former leader in local government, I was accountable. As a leader and manager of a business, I'm accountable. In other roles that I've had, I'm accountable. In this leadership role with my colleagues we've been in a privileged position to have the trust of the community to have a leadership role. Just fell into it. That comes with responsibility, and we feel very strongly that that responsibility now needs to shift into overdrive advocacy, because we're not being listened to where we need to be at the highest level. We are hearing why things can't happen, not what will be done to make them happen. You cannot be coming into the coldest months of the year and not have somewhere for people to sleep, not in a caravan that's cold, that's not appropriately insulated, and families in tents. Now the government, state government people are questioning, well, we want to see these people in tents. We want to see these families. We don't believe you. Now, I don't know if many people will realise, and you may not either, Max, but when you have children, you have a responsibility to keep them safe. If you're living in a tent and that's your only option, other authorities are alerted to the fact that you're living in a tent. So there's fear while they're doing their best for their children, some cover, trying to keep them together as a family, people aren't coming forward and going, oh yeah, come and look at me, because I'm exposing my vulnerability of my family. And are we going to be a family unit once everybody the do-gooders come in and try to help? All they need is solid structure, water, septic.
This is something that was imposed on these people too.
Yes.
We can call it a natural, just a natural disaster or whatever, but this is imposed on these people. One day, it was a hot summer, and a few days later, they'd lost, maybe a life's work, in the home they'd built and everything they were working towards. And when we talk about the cost, trying to wear the burden with 2 wages, with children, right now it's difficult to make ends meet, to the point that I am just amazed by anybody that can achieve it. We're talking, over probably $500 of groceries a week. We've got our fuel. We have to get to work. Often there's a bit of travel involved. You probably want some normality for your children, so some sport and things like that. That's going to cost a few $100s a week minimum. And I guess that's where those supports of some food provision and whatnot might not, we talk about dependency, it's not about that at all. The whole base, the security that these people had, has been literally demolished by fire. So they have nowhere to put those things to rebuild that back. And that's really why that support's so critical, isn't it? Because it can give them some normalcy, give them the shelter, give them some food, so they can start to rebuild the life that they once had.
So what we're witnessing now is a second disaster. And that second disaster is as you've described. People have lost everything, fires come through, and now we don't have, for many, and indeed for most, having the supports that they need to build back. To not just build back. You're not going to build your house in 2 seconds. You're not going to build your shearing shed in 2 seconds. You're not going to get your tractor back in 5 minutes. However, the second wave of disaster is this lack of response by government. The state in particular. We've heard a lot about there's this program and there's that program and there's this program. All of these programs that might have a couple of $100,000 thrown at them to have some people maybe on the ground and ringing up saying, what can we do? We can fund a community dinner for you once of or twice of. Lovely, but that's paying for people and a program. We know what we need. Just give local government money so they have good governance in place to feed it to the community, for the community to immobilise themselves, as many communities are now with their potluck dinners, and they come together on a Friday night or whatever it is and get together, because getting together around food saves lives. Saves communities. We were having people with this second wave in the disaster making the decision only 5.5 months in, so which isn't long, to sell and to move to buy down in town or elsewhere off the tablelands. These are people that have been there all their life, or been there 4 years or 4 months. But they're feeling pressured into a position because there's been so lack of support, or for some farmers having to destroy their 60 years of bloodline. I'm in my 70s and 80s. I'm not going to be I'm not going to live to 130. There's a math issue here. This isn't going to happen. So people should be able to absolutely do what they need to do. I think it is a sad indictment when government felt that to make it so there's no stamp duty if someone sells their property, helpful. I personally think that's only helping the person who's buying the property, not the person who's been forced to sell it. That person and that stamp duty amount, if that had gone into that person to keep them on their land, to support them on their land, then they wouldn't be making a decision that may not, for some it will, may not have been forced upon them. because they felt they have no choice.
Yeah, that's a massive thing, isn't it? There's it seems like a total lack of consideration of some of the policies.
Absolutely.
Because once these individuals are, leave the community in terms of a residency sense, you lose their skills, you lose that history, and you lose all the experience, and in 12 months' time, 18 months' time, they're exactly maybe the people the community needs, just as part of the group, to bring that bit of normalcy back.
Once you have a chain and it has different links, and it has an end that has a hook, and you have some chain might have had a bit stretched. Once you break those links, you can't pull the community along. You can't assist the community in recovery. And we're losing our links. We're losing our links of exactly, as you've mentioned, the skills, the experience, and the history. So we are kind of, in a way, many in the community are going hammer and tongs of, before these olds drop off the perch, but before they leave the tablelands, we need to, one thing the tablelands and rural communities do well is, certainly in recent years, is value the history. And we have lots of history written down. And I've only been going over some past history written. And for the activities that have been held in places like Ruffy, is astounding from the 1880s to now. And the land will heal us, as our Indigenous communities say. The land has been through trauma, but the land is what we stand on, and it will show us the way, and it has. With the little shoots that come out very cheekily, only less than 2 weeks in after everything's black. But it's been really well framed for me, that sits with me, that the government doesn't understand the disaster, how it happened, or why it happened. Conversation for another day. But the relief and the recovery, there is no reason to not understand what it needs. There is no reason in hell that they should not understand. Now, is it because they don't want to hear? Is it because the state doesn't have the finances, so therefore we need to kick the can into financial year? And I think it's fair for people to feel very hurt and sceptical that if this disaster of similar nature had happened, even for the same quantity of people, but in a larger metro area, what would the response have been? Is it because we are a scattered community and there's not a lot of us, so we're a low rate base? I don't want to be cynical about that, but I think it's a fact that if you've got parts of the community that feed the state and the country, are somewhere for tourism to come and be, somewhere to come to a small town and buy a meat pie and a latte, they won't be here if we don't support them. We've got businesses in Euroa, Alexandra, Yea. Yea has tourism traffic because of the snow, so it's picking up that. So does Yark's little stores and those things. But the Alexandras and the Yeas are really doing it tough. And I think, yet it was the businesses, I can speak for Euroa and Alex, that just showered the community with vouchers for practicality, opened accounts for particular people, and people could put money where they went. I think this is a really interesting thing to talk about around money and recovery, Max, is early on, very early on, and very quickly, within 3 weeks, I believe, a recovery fund was set up for the bushfires, which only included 2 of the shires in that recovery fund, and which is called the Strathbogie Disaster Relief Fund. And then there is the Murrindindi Foundation, which was formed through Black Saturday. So that foundation has continued and always had money bubbling away there supporting community. Because Black Saturday, we know there are people now that are only accessing services. There are people now who are only getting mental health supports all these years on. So there's these funds that are there. But I think initially those funds felt that this will be run by community, for community, with the least amount of overheads, all of these things. while it has had a lot of money go into it, I believe it's around $800,000. I think that falls very short of everybody's expectations of what a fund like that would have had go into it. And I think that's a symptom of a few things. I think it's a symptom of trust of previous fundraisers of where the money didn't go where it was intended.
Right.
It's also fact, not a symptom, that I hear, if not daily, every second day, where do I put money to know that it's going to go to the people directly? I need to know it is going to get to that family in the tent. I need to know that it's going to go to food or to keep the hub going. And hubs, this is echoed across, not just to table mates. Very simple, it's the same, just different community. So we're not seeing the trust in where to put community money, community people wanting to do it. So that's a symptom of a challenge that we have as a society, which has come from past experience, which is fact.
Yeah.
So we applaud the people who have the funds, and are running them, and they're trying their absolute utmost to advocate and get some big dollars in there.
Yeah.
But it's nowhere near what it would have been. But that's a symptom and a response from previous issues that haven't been addressed around the trust, accountability. I'm not suggesting there's no accountability with these funds at all, but they're wearing the brunt now of this challenge that we have around giving and it getting to where it needs to. So they're working really hard on that, and I applaud them, and we do everything we can to support that. But I know originally the 6 of us as a leadership group at the hub, and currently 4, daily or a second daily, we have people going, where do I put this money? We have no formal structure.
Yeah, right.
We've got people wanting to throw cash at us. We can't do that.
Yeah.
So we have thought outside the box, and our local supermarkets here in Euroa, and I believe there's something similar in Alex and other, that there's a cash is put in to the local supermarkets. Then the hubs go in to get their weekly what they need, or there's an event they can go in and get. So that's what that money's going to, and that was explained to the people who gave it, and they agreed to that. When people come to us with things, we say just this Sunday, and we've had multiple events where we're connecting community, and we do have some grants, over the farm gate grants, but you have to pay for the event first, then put in to get reimbursed. But the criteria, if you don't meet the criteria, things that you may have paid for don't meet the criteria by someone's determination, and we might not be writing it or putting it in a way that meets the criteria in their eyes, so therefore we're not funded for it. So we're finding out there are things that we can't claim that we've had to pay for, that we thought was in a grant.
Yeah.
Again, volunteers doing their best. This was auspiced by another group because we didn't have the formal structure.
Yeah.
Doing their best.
Yeah.
All volunteers coordinating this and having events. So we have an event for kids coming up that will see Batman, Taylor Swift, and Chase from Paw Patrol. A bit of fun, a bit of photo.
Yeah.
We have a wonderful group who have provided almost all of the cost of those characters and those performers for that day. Then that meant that we could stretch that grant further to do things that will benefit for that event. They're a volunteer organisation that has raised funds to go, what can we do that's meaningful for kids?
Yeah.
So we said, this would be great, beautiful. They then were able to pay that particular bill directly because we don't have that mechanism set up. Constantly volunteers are having to think about the governance, the connections, the reporting, the flow of money in a really complex environment with no support.
Yeah. I think it's a good time to take a quick break and we'll come back.
No worries.
What's springing to mind?
I think probably something that sort of with the leadership group we sort of found most of us sort of fell into a lane of what we worked in. So for me, my lane was wellbeing, mental health, that kind of thing, which I recognised early and really appreciated early from a nurse and etc. that we needed to have some clinical supports in person early. So we were really fortunate that GB Health came on board, and we had also Dr. Rob Gordon speak to the community and some colleagues from the Department of Health's disaster panel, if you like, of experts, psychologists, etc., and spoke to the community about what they're going through. And that was probably, maybe 8 weeks or so in, or maybe not even. And then GB Health agreed to provide a clinical psychologist for 3 months, about 1.5 days a week, with no funding. There's no funding to GB Health to do this.
So there's no connection between the state government, this emergency, and basic provision of mental health services?
Of clinical support,
okay.
In this instance, no. So Primary Care Networks and I believe the Yea and Alexandra Hospital have a partnership and have some programs. But also of significance was the Mental Health Wellbeing Local is a peer-based mental health support program service based in Shepparton. However, they provided and provide us, continue to provide us with a peer who is there to support people who come in and they may be struggling with their mental health, and they might say, well, they have a conversation and they work out a plan. Is it something that you really need to probably see a psychologist straight away? Or sometimes there are other things, it might be more counselling, or it might be, do you have a case manager to help you with these things that are overwhelming you, and therefore you can, your resilience will come through. The challenge around is they haven't received any funding, either directly to support Strathboat. So we're running on goodwill of service providers that are, I think hospitals are not for profit, right? So is this mental health wellbeing program. And then we have 2 issues there. They're not funded, and then there's a limit of, not a limit of take up in the clinical support. The clinical support person we have there at the moment, psychologist, is fully booked. And they're trying to share themselves around and not, refer to other, more sustainable people, not knowing how long they will be there to form this relationship. And mental health is something that you need a team around you, and if you're reliant on one clinician or one person, take that person out of the picture, and then you're all in a whole world of pain again. So this person has been really trying to refer to other. We've also had a referral process that we encourage people to go to their GP, do a mental health care plan, of which we've got our most vulnerable, annoying, stoic farmers doing just that. They go to their GP and they do a mental health care plan, show their vulnerability, only to be then told, well, it's a 6-month wait or a 3-month wait for a psychologist. So we had our local psychologist here in town with some colleagues donate for a month their time 1 and 2 days a week. They just couldn't continue that because of their private practice was getting an influx of fire affected people. So they were already very busy with their mental health practice, overwhelmed by new referrals, could not come out on the ground and give up a day to be on place and space to support community directly.
And those individuals have a capacity as well. They've got to look out for themselves so that they can continue to provide that service. And they've also probably quite impacted themselves by the fire. So there's a real need to look after these people that are part of the community providing these services so that they can stick around, because consequences really flow on. Is it right just at this point to draw the link between the fire creating the need for a recovery, the tough recovery process because of the lack of resourcing, then feeding in to the tough environment in mental health as individuals' financial reserves draw down, we move into winter, the general energy we have with optimism and so on draws down, so the need becomes greater and greater because of the impact of the prior influence.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I referred to before around the second wave of the disaster. This is really well documented in royal commissions, in disaster recovery frameworks, in papers done by people who know what they're talking about. And we know that this wave, the 6 months mark, the other anniversaries, etc. But the 6 months normally for fires is in the middle of winter, where we're already lack of sunshine, we're cold, we're already a bit, discombobulated by the fire event. We're not, for many, not living in their home, or their home doesn't exist, or they're displaced, or we've got families that have been separated with the partner working on farm to keep the job, but there's no housing for the family. Then the other part of the family is living either in a nearby town or not a nearby town, wherever they can get accommodation. So you've got families separated, and we know if you have families separated for an extended period of time, it is really detrimental to that unit. And that includes the family not being on the hill. We talked about those that can't be on their properties at the moment. And the communities, it's not just at the table ends, but are working really hard to ensure that there's purpose and reason, and ensure that they know about what events are occurring, whether it's the Friday night dinners, that come to it, keep connected, come to it. And because we need them there. We need those people that are our community. We're not a community without people in it. And if we lose people in it, we're not that community. Now, we will never be the same community. We will never be the same. People are using the normal word. Well, what's normal? Nothing's normal now. This is an abnormal, and what we're experiencing is a response and a recovery to an abnormal event. And we need to have abnormal, not normal responses to have a recovery. But we're not seeing that from government. We're seeing them actually break up a system that worked. In Black Saturday, Christine Nixon led the recovery. In other flood events, there's been this all agency, all in, one leader kind of thing directing the traffic. This is so fragmented and so run by what has been my personal experience. Lovely people, but so inexperienced and out of their depth, and just wanting to justify why something can't happen or why it didn't happen, but not what they're going to do to make sure the next bit happens, because that's all we can control. We can't control what happened. There's a whole discussion around preparedness and learning from that. Mind you, we've done that, been there, done that. Not our first radio, however, but we need to know and listen to what we're saying for what we need now, for the next week, month, year. What won't be available, for example, are people like us, the four of us in a leadership role at a recovery hub, that can be there in 12 months' time. I shouldn't be here in 6 months' time. As you were talking about, people need to support themselves to support people. We, as a family, haven't really started our recovery. Now, we are not impacted like other people. We've got house survival guilt that our little house up there stayed, and that's a real thing because, while we have a tenant, we're not reliant on it, where we didn't have stock at the time. We're not reliant on our farm, our tiny farm, to be a real farm, but it matters to us. And we haven't had that time or ability to be on country in our place and space and talk about our recovery. Now, that's by choice, because good down by Mark and you do what you do, and we've got a bit of work happening there, and we look forward to that. But I and my other colleagues and others dotted around all these other hubs can't be, while the hub might only be open technically 1 day a week, it's open every day. And I and my colleagues are working on the hub every day.
So
keep the doors open.
Yeah, like if I drop in to say g'day to you, pretty much all the time, every time, doesn't matter what time of day I go to see you, you'll be on the phone or writing something up on the computer, it's a full-time thing for multiple people who are working in a volunteer donor capacity, doing work that should be far more supported and understood, just start to understand what is actually being done from government.
Yeah. So we were asked by our colleague at the Shire to sort of try to fill in a spreadsheet what we do. Now I can see why that's been asked, but for me I was a bit, just have someone beside us filling out the bloody form. I don't have time to fill out your spreadsheet. And how do I write down what I do, what we do
And
as
you
individuals?
know what they don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is I annoyingly like to document things, and there's a place for that formal structure, but there's an equal place for informal discussions for those in a position, not just because they're paid, but because it's their job or they're the link to make sure something happens. For the people of the community at the moment, we're the link to make something happen. That's not sustainable. It's not appropriate now in many cases. So we need to have that support that should come from a state-paid position. One person, full-time, could share their role around the Murrumbidgee, Mitchell and Strathbogie fire impact area. Could go to each hub 1 day a week, half day, make sure that happens. Do all the admin stuff around events, around sourcing of materials, around all of these things, because guess what? The comms is very similar. The things we need are probably the same, and we could be getting them from a more coordinated way. This week we get the meat from a Euroa supplier, next week we get it, or whatever. We've built systems out of no systems, however there's a vulnerability in that mix. There's a vulnerability is that they should be temporary, not permanent. Otherwise it leaves us open to the governance not being what it needs to be open for interpretation, that that wasn't quite the right thing or whatever, because you won't get people volunteering. You're seeing a volunteer shift. We won't talk about CFA, but you're seeing a volunteer shift of people going, really busy, haven't got time for it, and why would I do it anyway when I'm going to be my head on the chopping block? And I think that's a fair summation to say, because when everything goes well, government love to come along and pat you on the back and cut a ribbon. When things don't go well, what I'm experiencing is, we'll do more with less. Keep getting what you can for free. There's no funding for it. Don't come asking here. We support you, but we can't do this, and we can't do that, and we can't do this, and we can't do that. I'm not hearing what government at local and state consistently actually will do moving forward. What is their plan? I don't think they have a plan. I think the state government is more focused on larger constituent areas, other problems, not the largest fire in state history. It just blows my mind why that would not be.
Yeah.
And I mentioned the Army before. I think it's a really fair thing, and lots of people ask, well, where was the Army in this relief and recovery? Well, I don't believe the Army was asked. They have to be asked to come. Why would you not ask an Army to come to the largest fire in state history on private land? Amazing. Blaze aid cannot fix every fence. A farmer, most farmers will not see their internal fencing and their internal structures rebuilt, including the house if that's relevant for them, if they lost their house, in their lifetime.
Yep.
So why are we not using what resources we have? Blaze aid think outside the box, and they had low security prisons. They had private schools. They had other groups come teaching them about disaster and recovery and resilience. We do need to find another word for resilience, because resilience means just not being able to do the same thing next week and it'll bounce right up. I don't believe that's resilience. I believe that's us not learning from the past experience, that our resilience got us through that, but we need to find another word around the can-do attitude, that we'll put our shoulder to the wheel, but we need support.
There's certain things you can provide for yourself, like people can give each other a hug, they can have a conversation, they can share a meal, they can keep an eye out for each other. But when it comes to the basic fundamentals, the resourcing of it, of an incident, an emergency imposed on a community, it comes without warning and does huge damage. Do you think there's currently a misunderstanding at certain levels of government of just how real the impact is? Do you think even there's a simple misunderstanding that there is a real consequence that needs not just a plan through to the end of the calendar year, but for the next 10 years, for the next 20 years, and then, let's start to be proactive. What can we do in the areas surrounding to bring confidence, reduce concerns from insurance companies so that insurance is possible for land owners? That just doesn't seem to be a consideration. It seems to be very detached, uninformed, inexperienced. That's from my perspective, but yeah, what do you think?
I think there's a disconnect because it hasn't been seen, touched and felt by the leaders. They came with their cameras and their camera crews in the early days when there was smoke in the air, and we were here and we haven't seen them. The community hasn't seen them turn a sausage, get a tea towel and a dry dish, have a conversation with someone, grassroots, CEO, person, as a person, to a person. And I wrote to the Premier of this state respectfully, and I also did a video post, several, ask, please come, because you cannot read, you cannot understand by reading a report what's going on. You have to see it, experience it, and talk to people. Now, if safety was an issue, or people are going to give leaders a hard time, we can do it quietly, off the record. But they haven't been to understand what it's like. And we just don't get it. If it had happened in a more metro, larger area, there would be cameras there every week. We've had an amazing media response initially, and we've got locals that became profiled over that, and then there was the circle back, particularly with the ABC, came back 3 months later as they promised they would. Just because the fire's out doesn't mean it's done. What it did when it wasn't out will never be undone, but to recover, we need to recover. We need resources to recover. And that's not just money. That is things that can't be measured by dollars. That's empathy. That's respect. That's continuity. That's communication. The communication is appalling. I do not understand why it is so hard to communicate with community. All of the mediums that we have. Letter drops. Yep, there are lots of people who don't have mailboxes. Go hammer and tongs at a weekly communique on social media and to community. We have notice boards, we have other ways that we're trying to connect with community. It's not our job to be the only source of information for community. And we have become that, so have the other hubs. We have to fact check. If we get given a number by a government agency or a program, we ring that number and fact check it first. Often the number is out of order, or it's not ready yet, or the link that they send to go to Form B and C, error message. We can't give vulnerable people inaccurate information because they're trusting that we're the ones passing it to them if it doesn't work. And sometimes we've passed that to them and said, it's okay. The cavalry's coming. We are the cavalry. The cavalry hasn't come, and it appears it's not going to come. Now, what might change for us is we are in an election year and we're going into the last 6 months for the state election. The skeptic in me says, surely they'll start throwing some money at this and some common sense. But I'm not confident that's going to happen because we're not array-based.
It has to happen.
I'm not confident it's going to happen because it's too hard. And I'm not confident it's going to happen because they don't understand that it needs to happen, Max. Because they haven't seen it, felt it, touched it. Now, we can only invite people, we can only beg, we can only encourage, we can only get a bit miffed and be, for serious sake, get down here. And I do believe that it's to the point where if the Premier won't come to us, then we go to the Premier with information, with a video of person X who wants to share their story and take it and deliver it personally. Because I don't believe that the Premier would be allowing what's happening if she was genuinely aware of it. I cannot believe that she would do that.
Yeah, I think you have to. That has to be the case because nobody could be so neglectful.
Absolutely, and I think we have our local member who is a member for everyone, not just for those who voted for her. Our local member was impacted with the fires as well, personally and professionally. This local member has been resourceful, respectful, committed, and now is being extremely direct in calling out some things that have been some untruths that she has tried to say, I know this is a fact, please do something. Now, I don't know our member intimately, but what I do know is what I see and how I feel. Doesn't matter how I vote, what I'm seeing is a leader who is listening and hearing and following through. What I'm not hearing from government, I had spoke at the bushfire, the summer fire inquiry on behalf of the hub. I put in a submission of my own around the event, which I did not hold back, but which is a separate to my role at the hub. I try to keep them as separate as possible. But who's reading this? And our local member has taken videos and has taken stories back to government, and government are like, really? I believe government are, yeah, really? Like, this is affecting people. It needs a person-centred response. It needs a trauma-informed response, not a high-level person responsible for recovery being very animated around, oh, that's just not true, that's just not what's happening, and here's why that's not true, because...
Sorry, something you mentioned earlier, you were talking about you were present in a command centre and you shared a bit of information because someone had called you and said, look, the fire's just passed through Ruffy and it's moving at a rate. Be aware of that. They didn't believe you. And it's a pretty consequential thing. I mean, they've got their information there. They're reasonably sure of their systems they've got in front of them. But the initial response was to disregard what you said. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I do. And I think that's the symptom of what we're seeing now.
And we're seeing it again.
We're seeing it again. So that's why it's a second disaster. That's why it's a second wave. That is why we are going to lose people to the tableland, to the district, off the planet, as well as physically. So I think my question to government is, why are we not seeing a response that we've seen in other bushfires? Why do we make this where community need to be pitted against each other and compete for recovery? Being uninsured, you received help in recovery and cleaning. Underinsured, everybody's underinsured. Nobody is overinsured or adequately insured.
Inflation's.
So why have this disaster not the same as other disasters and make this two-tiered system? This particular leader that I was speaking to said it's not two-tiered, and then proceeded to explain to me what she thought it was. All I heard back was, what she explained was it's a two-tiered system. And what we were making were have and have-nots and competing. And then you're pitting people against each other. Community vulnerable that need each other. Why did they get this and we don't get that?
It really has to be a judge of character and leadership capability, doesn't it? Because if we allow these things to happen, if information isn't able to flow through, and when information does flow through, you're doing fact checking. You can go, all right, I've got a bit of information here. Let's check it out and make sure it is. Oh gosh, that shouldn't be happening. Let's reorganise. A week later, you come back and attack the problem. It's an incredible vulnerability, isn't it?
And I think we've had the luxury of this by chance group of the 6 of us, 4 of us, come together in that we come from different life experience. So we knew we have a farmer, a couple of farmers, a teacher, nursing, a couple of nurses, and comms and community connection. And we were kind of like, could bring our life experience and go, well, farmers are going to need, supplements for their stock. They're going to need wood blocks. They're going to need, we're able to be the practical thinking. This is the resources we need to ask for and get. And we got, let's be honest, it was insane, the response that we received, or donations.
Yeah.
So we had that kind of fact check. Hang on a minute. So I went chasing for mental health supports and knocking on doors. Others went knocking on, for the farming requirements, fodder. Others went knocking on around social and community. And I just don't understand that we're in the lucky country to go through the biggest disaster. And I really don't care if we don't have the funds, because it's kind of like, this is something that you have to pay for. This is not an option. We all have a choice through this disaster. Do I buy the new dress? Do I need it, or do I want it? Those decisions are happening every day with people in this fire event. Do I need that, or do I want it? Do I need it now, but I can get it later? If I don't get it now, that will impede my recovery because, or if I don't do this investment now in whatever it is, a new tractor, because the tractor might not have been insured, well, I can help my recovery if I have that piece of machinery. Where if I go buy something else, things for the house that I don't have, that can happen later. So you've got people thinking about what they need and can make decisions and are making, I'm concerned around the finance decisions that some people are making around how they're going to manage those debts moving forward. Because if they don't have a roof over their head and they don't have these social pillars holding them up with that strong foundation, that's at risk, and then that puts them at more financial risk.
So do you think it's fair to say that there will be individuals right now, we're talking probably hundreds, thousands, that will be under significant financial stress, as everybody is, but these individuals even more so because of the event that's happened. So they're taking on more debt, looking out forward, trying to rebuild a life's work in many cases. This is really a situation where individuals are having to facilitate recovery, donate, and the donations have been massive, but even those individuals, many of them probably can't afford or probably stop supporting because they're like, look, I've got to tap out, I can't afford to do any more, I've got to make sure I make it through the winter or whatever it might be. And that's really going to create some massive long-term complications and really forces division, because we need to see more support. I think it might be fair to say that it's probably never too late to start trying to get it right. So line in the sand, from this point on, we're going to attack it in this way. Do you think it's fair to say that we have to do more to get our message out there and share it so that it can be digested over time? Do you also think it's fair to say that we should have a goal to make sure that in the future we're just a hell of a lot better at it? So that if you are putting in your effort, it's getting real massive gain, not just the survival level.
I think absolutely. And if I could just use that this was the Longwood Fire. In 1965, there was a Longwood Fire. Now that Longwood Fire had community build resilience around fire prevention, fire protection, working together, being prepared, because that was always there, right in the back of their mind. Now we have another Longwood Fire that's affecting far wider than just Longwood itself. But we can learn something from Longwood, from the way that they came together as a community and built resilience and fire preparedness post the 1965 fire. But then in recent years there's been impediments to them being able to do what they've done for years. Whether it was the practicalities of a burn around the town to protect it, whether it was about the fact that the community come together and give confidence that they're all there and had the practice with their stuff and they're connected in protection and preparedness. There might put barriers that we've seen in recent years that was, well, there's no need to do that. That's why we've got helicopters and planes. We've seen we don't have enough helicopters and planes.
Yeah.
So I think I would like to touch on the recovery and the importance of our children. And they're a lost commodity in this, and I call them a commodity because they're our future. So they're our, I don't mean that in any disrespectful way, but they are what we need to invest in so we have a future. And the amount of trauma, vicarious trauma, unintentional, that has occurred for children in this fire, whether directly impacted in the fire or indeed not. When grown-ups talk about things, we sometimes say too much out loud and kids take that on. We know that 70% of adults who experience a trauma like this have the cognitive and lived experience to go, it was pretty tough, but yep, I can get through this and I'll be right. And about 30% of adults will need some form of help, and about 2% of adults will be left with a long-term mental illness due to this. But here's the thing, kids, 100% of children do not have the brain capacity, function, lived experience and skills and capacity to navigate what this has been without support. So by not providing funding where it needs to be for recovery, directly impacts on our children's mental health, directly impacts into their long-term recovery and or being left with a mental illness for the rest of their life. So we have parents who say to me, I'm an absent parent. My kids come home from school, they might come out and help us, but they'll just be at home, they're just doing their own thing till we come in when it's dark because we're dispensing and we're stock and we're lambing and we're all of this. We're absent. There are families, breakdown, that are separating. Only 5.5 months in, that have made that decision to separate as a family. Multiple. This is not just a couple or a handful, this is multiple. Then we have husband and wives who have grown-up children that are also separating due to the stress and strain. Because they're not supported, because they don't have that practical recovery, mental health supports, connection supports, rebate programs around materials and funding, entering into financial hardship because of the price of fuel, not planning a crop that is their income for the next year, or not being able to afford to go buy stock to restock because it's a gamble. I've got to keep them alive. Is my pasture ready? Do I have enough nutrients in what I've got? How am I going to do the complementary feeding? Where am I going to get paid from? So that is a domino effect to then a community who runs on the back of the farmer or the back of an industry that supports a farmer. whether that's an equine pursuit or a viticulture pursuit or an wider agricultural, more traditional beef, cattle, whatever pursuit. The fact is, we need to feed the country and the state. We need to feed each other, and we need to have a livelihood where it isn't just this is the largest fire that impacted on private land, and private land becomes not functional as a legacy of not acting and not leading. And that's what we're seeing by the government. The mental health supports require housing, food, connection, and support, basically. Fundamentals to our daily function of life, with or without a fire. You cut that in half, or you don't have it at all, well, of course, the worst scenarios are going to happen. But what we can't do, and what we're choosing not to do, is to be silent about it and to not speak up about it. And it is a very sad thing when I have colleagues say to me, Colleen, you can afford to not work again. You can afford to not have another job in government because you're at the end of your career. I can't. But you please keep going. You have my full support, but I can't do what you're doing because of fear that's going to impact my business, my next grant that I go for, or my job in local government or state or federal. What a sad place for us to be in Australia, that is how people present themselves. Now, we're pretty forward around communicating what we feel strongly about. However, I don't feel at any time I've been disrespectful. I've been very mindful that being disrespectful and calling people names is not going to make anything happen. But I feel extremely disrespected as a leader, as an evidence person who is confidently, respectfully speaking for more than just myself, to not be heard and not offered an opportunity to be heard. I'm one of many in the same boat, but I'm just saying for me, that is hurtful when people feel they have to say that out loud to someone, to say, keep going. We've got other very strong leaders in these hubs. And I want to give an example. It's recognised by the local governments that the hubs have done an outstanding job. You did what we couldn't. You're doing what we can't. We want to give you a day where you can come together as a hub group and connect and have some time out. And we'll speak about our self-care to support you. We have some massages, some pampering, good food and connection. Now, there was a lack of numbers. That was meant to be happening yesterday. Lack of numbers because not enough people put their hand up. And I rang a few of them and said, did you put your hand up to go to this day? Because myself and my colleagues did. And they said, no, I'd much prefer the $500 or $600 they're going to spend on me an event to put new tyres on my car that I've had to use and abuse to do my role. I don't have time to go for a massage at the moment. Now, our group saw that a little differently because I think that's an absolutely really valid point. We could all do with an extra $500 in our pocket for what we've all contributed, but we don't want that. But I feel for the local governments that were trying to be together as one and bring people together and thank and to celebrate. But everybody's at a different stage of place, and the scepticism and the practicalities was, that's money wasted on me and I'm not worthy. That's a symptom of what we can be if we are this resilient word, that I'm not worthy of having a pat on the back and a massage by a small way of thanks for the effort. However, when we put this to the fire victims and the survivors of this fire, that we are worthy. We are worth the government investing in us because we all matter. It doesn't matter where we live. It doesn't matter what our job is or isn't. Our children matter. Our families matter. Our livestock matter. Our pets matter. Hear us, see us, and help us in the recovery that we need. It is not rocket science, it just needs leadership.
Well, I think we're going to need a part 2.
Think
We'll call this part 1, and yeah, maybe in 4 weeks or something we can catch up and continue this conversation. Thanks, Mum. But yeah, all the best being Colleen Furlanetto out there, and probably something I'm going to look to get a bit better of an understanding of is some of these other individuals out there who are part of different groups, teams that have been playing certain roles, and see if there's similarities with experience, because from what I'm picking up, the consequence of failing at this next part of the incident's, phase is too great. And money is not the problem. This is an issue that can be greatly relieved by resourcing, and see that these communities become examples of, all the good things that make up that part of our Aussie culture. Because at the end of the day, it's a resource to feed and enjoy and be a part of and maybe move to and get around. So, yeah, we're disappointed in government, aren't we? But we absolutely, massive opportunity. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit. Yeah, lovely. See you at the next one.
No worries.